Hey everybody, this is Nick with Rogue Overland. And in this video, I'm going to tell you the upgrades ShiftPod has made to the ShiftPod 3 as compared to the ShiftPod 2. And I'm also going to give you a little insight on why we think the ShiftPod is a great ground tent after 5 years of using it. As discussed in the intro, I'm going to take you through the improvements that ShiftPod has made to the ShiftPod 3 versus the ShiftPod 2. But before we get into that, I'd like to say if you are into outdoor and off-road content, please consider checking out our other videos and subscribe to the channel. Here at Rogue Overland, we purchased our first ShiftPod about 5 years ago. And currently we have a ShiftPod 2, the full-size version, and then we have two ShiftPod minis. And we have used those tents in all different conditions, ranging from hot, windy desert conditions to cool mountain conditions, and we've had them in the rain. So we've had a lot of experience with how these tents function. Right now we're out on an 11-day off-road adventure. We have two families, 5 people in each of those families living out of 2 SUVs, an awesome 2000 Toyota 4Runner. You can check out that walk around video right here. And then we are also in on Conius, the 2001 solid axle swapped Nissan Xterra. And you can check out that walk around video up here. I want to say thank you to ShiftPod because they have lent us a ShiftPod 3 so that we can test it out and we can tell you the improvements that they've made. The first thing we're going to do is go through the improvements that they've made to the ShiftPod 3. And then hang on to the end of the video because I'm going to tell you why we think the ShiftPod is a great ground tent after having used it for about 5 years. In our opinion, the most beneficial improvement that they've made to the ShiftPod 3 is that it's lighter. In talking to the representative at ShiftPod, it's about 10 pounds lighter than the ShiftPod 2. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have a vehicle loaded up to go out on an adventure, and most of the Overland vehicles out there these days are over the weight that they should be carrying, 10 pounds is a lot. If you can cut 10 pounds off, that's going to help your rig out so that's not having to work as hard, and that's going to minimize the potential for failures. Additionally, what we think is also a very beneficial improvement is that there is a now sort of convection, if you will, system going on. So they have vents in the bottom of the ShiftPod and then vents up above, and that's to promote the hot air to move out the top and cooler air to come in from the bottom. So that's going to help with the temperature inside the tent, and what we've also noticed it's helped with the condensation on the inside of the tent. The condensation is significantly less in the ShiftPod 3 versus the ShiftPod 2. Now additionally, they have improved on the handles for deploying the tent, for opening up each wall of the tent. They're much more ergonomic now, where in the beginning they were basically just straps you'd grab onto. Now it's a small T-handle that you can grab, and that's going to be a more ergonomic setup. They've also made improvement to the fabric. So the fabric on the ShiftPod 3 is more reflective, and it is, instead of a diamond pattern, stitch pattern, like on the ShiftPod 2, the ShiftPod 3 has a hexagon pattern. So this makes the material more reflective. They've also added a coating which makes the fabric more mildew resistant. So on the ShiftPod 2, it's about 7 days in their lab testing until the formation of mildew. And on the ShiftPod 3, when stored wet, it's about 21 days before they see the formation of mildew. Now they clearly tell you that it should not be stored wet or damp. And all outdoor materials shouldn't be. But this is a great thing to have because when you're out traveling, sometimes you can't get your gear fully dry before you have to pack up and head on to the next place. We've experienced this several days here in Colorado. We were in a thunderstorm one night, woke up, everything was drenched, and you know, there's just no way to get it fully dried out before you can store it. So pack it up as dry as you can get it, and when you get to the next campsite, hopefully you can get it aired out. The last improvement I'd like to talk about is on the hubs and the pulls on the inside. So the hubs look like a beefier pattern to us as compared to the ShiftPod 2. And then they've added quarter 20 receivers to each of the hubs, so you can attach lights, you can attach cameras, anything else you need to attach, that's gonna be a standard camera attachment. And then the last thing is the poles or spars on the inside, instead of being made of fiberglass, they're now made of carbon fiber. So that's gonna add to some of that weight reduction that we talked about earlier. I'd like to just take a quick minute to say, if you enjoy this video and find it informative, please smash the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel. You can also help support the channel by purchasing Rogue Overland swag at rogueoverland.com/shop. It really helps us to produce more great content for the off-road and outdoor community. One improvement worth noting that's not to the ShiftPod 3 itself is to the bag. The ShiftPod 2 bag versus the ShiftPod 3 bag. The ShiftPod 3 bag appears to be much more robust. Now, we don't have any confirmation from ShiftPod on this specifically, but we've used the ShiftPod 2 for many, many years, and the ShiftPod 3 bag, the fabric feels much beefier and robust. There are straps within the bag that help restrain the ShiftPod 3 inside the bag. And then additionally, the zipper appears to be much more robust. Now, this is a great improvement when you consider that you want your gear to be functional when you get to your campsite. And this bag so far on this trip has done that very well. Okay, so now we want to talk about the pros and cons of the ShiftPod after years of experience. Brought Mike in here. Mike's been part of Rogue for a long time. You've heard his voice in some of our adventure videos like this one right here. And he is the builder and captain of the Little Black Toyota.
Yes, I am.
So he's spent as much time in a ShiftPod as I have. So here we go. We're going to talk about some pros and cons. So Mike, I know you were rocking the ShiftPod 2 during this trip.
Yep, we took the 2 with us.
Took the 2, and then we had the ShiftPod 3. So man, what are your thoughts? What are some of the things you've seen so far?
I love the tent. It's again, like these guys, we're a family of 5, so we've got 3 little people with us, and I like that there's so much floor space inside of that thing. We can all get in it. We can all stand up. There's been nights when the weather's bad and we all got plenty of room to, shove our sleeping stuff to the side, play a quick game of Uno. It's just one of my favorite things about it is the amount of space in that thing.
Yeah, and I'm 5'11". Mike, how tall are you?
About 5'10".
5'10". So in the middle of the ShiftPod, I can stand up completely upright.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, it's probably 4 inches
still,
or so.
well, I mean, even probably behind us, you can see the height difference.
Yeah.
just from being next to it.
So that definitely is a nice thing. I mean, it is truly a shelter. You have space to move around.
Yes.
In talking about that, one of the things that we have noticed is that compared to a less robust tent, let's say, it is a heavier setup.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you can't really compare it to a nylon tent, your standard nylon tent you get it at Walmart or something like that. It is a heavier tent. The walls are well insulated in it. It really does a good job of keeping you warm at night and stuff like that. So you've got, you pay a price in weight to have that extra stability and that extra toughness in a tent.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's right. It is truly a shelter.
Yeah.
They have made the improvement in the ShiftPod 3, which is a great pro in our mind, being 10 pounds lighter.
Yeah, 10 pounds is huge.
But yeah, we've had it, well, shoot, you guys had it in the thunderstorm the other night.
Yep. Had it in the thunderstorm the other night.
Yep, so ShiftPod 3, both the ShiftPods did great in the thunderstorm.
Yep.
Keep you completely dry. And then I've actually been in a pretty massive windstorm out in the desert years ago. This was in the ShiftPod 2.
Yep.
But again, the ShiftPod 3 is only making improvements on the 2. And you can shut that thing up, and it is nasty outside, but
Yeah.
it is comfortable inside.
Yeah, it's a good windbreak.
Yeah.
It's even as flat, they've done a really good job of designing it. The wind kind of goes around. It's amazing to me the thing doesn't collapse over on top of you, but
Yeah, and they have a
Really
video
good job.
out. I'm not sure. I can't remember the exact speed, but it's, I want to say about 100 miles an hour or more of wind that this thing can stand up
more
to.
than I'm going to camp in, period.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that. And then let's see, what are some other pros that we like about the ShiftPod?
I actually like the doors on it. I think it's kind of fun walking in and out. And I tell you, this is kind of random, but one of my favorite things about the tent is how many comments you get about it. Like if you want to meet people and talk to people, set one of these up in a campground somewhere and everybody's going to come by and talk to you.
Yep, absolutely. And that is one thing I should comment on the SHIFTPOD 3 that at SHIFTPOD they told me is if someone's giving you questions about the tent, you can actually just tap a smartphone up
Right
against here, and there's, I believe, a RF chip, and that will actually pull up the information about the tent so that that person can read about it. Because
so if you don't want to talk to people, just point and say scan and go away.
Scan here, leave me alone. An additional thing that I've found to be a pro, and Mike, I'm sure you'll agree with me, is the fast setup. When
Yeah,
you're
it's
out,
super quick.
when you're out camping, we're with kids a lot. We both have 3 kids. Man, any time that you can save, right?
Oh yeah,
Anytime. Yeah. And that's the great thing about this is it just folds up like an accordion, and then you pull on each side, pop it out. How fast would you say you get it set up in?
We can have the tent up in a few minutes, literally 3 minutes. Once we get it out of the bag and kind of spread it around and pop it up, 2-3 minutes max.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a great pro. Now, here at Rogue, we like to give you gear review videos of products that have been used and give you the pros and the cons so that you can decide if it's worth your investment in that piece of gear. And I will say that the cons list for this particular tent in our minds is very short. The weight, as we talked about,
it's still a heavy tent.
It's still a heavy tent, so you need to take that into consideration. Again, remember it is a shelter. It's not so much like a backpacking tent.
No.
It's a shelter. Like you really could live out of this thing if you needed to, but it is heavy. Now they've made that improvement on the SHIFTPOD 3, improving the weight, and it is a significant difference. I've noticed the difference in throwing these up onto the roof.
Which is awesome that SHIFTPOD has listened to some of those complaints about the 2 and kind of incorporated them into this too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we would want to comment on as being a con you need to consider is that these condensate a fair amount. Right?
Now the 2 I know has been really bad. You kind of, I know Nick talked earlier about, this one's a lot better about packing up wet, but you do need to leave it out a little bit in the morning and kind of let it dry out a little bit if you can, if you've got the time. But I think the 2, I believe you said they've improved upon that also in the 3, right? The condensation?
Absolutely. So as you saw earlier in the video, they now have that convection system with the vents on the bottom and on the top to promote airflow. And what I will say from the time I've had in this, and I'm on day, what are we on, day 8 or 9?
With the kids, about 57, I think.
Yeah. I think it's 8 nights so far in the 3. Is the condensation is significantly less.
Yeah.
Now I don't have a gauge, no scientific measurements, but just from the old wipe the hands, seat of the pants test it's probably about 70% improvement.
Yeah, I know the 2 was pretty rough about condensating, so we've been dealing with that. But yeah, it seems like they've fixed that. That's awesome.
Yeah, so keep in mind, all tents are going to condensate. Don't say, oh God, that one condensates, I can't get it. All tents condensate, and you know that if you've been out in tents. Rooftop tents condensate, they all do.
Yeah.
It's just that there is a fair amount of condensation if you zip them up completely, because they do. I mean, they lock it down to protect you from the elements.
Yep, it's a good thing to be able to do that, but and there's workarounds for it too. We've learned if you just leave all the windows cracked a little bit, and I think it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and ours is already dried out. Since we've been up and moving around cooking breakfast and stuff. So yeah, just something you got to work around.
So there you go. There's the pros and cons in our mind after about 5 years of using the SHIFTPOD. If you have some thoughts, do you have a SHIFTPOD? Have you tried other tents? Throw some comments below. Let us know what you think. Is there anything that we missed as far as pros or cons of the SHIFTPOD? I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider smashing that like button and subscribing to the channel. On our YouTube channel, you can find other gear review videos, walk around videos, and adventure videos, also trail review videos. You can find us on all social media avenues at Rogue Overland, and we'll see you on the trail.